Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Clifford Festival of Fintech event. We're delighted to have you join us today for today's panel discussion on the dynamic and evolving fintech landscape in the Middle East. Thank you for joining us. We have an exciting session ahead. I'm going to first start by introducing our esteemed panelists today, each of them fintech experts in their field. We have Bryan D'Souza, who is the head of business development for the Middle East at R3. He has been a strategic business leader, has a strong background in business development and partnerships within the financial services sector. Next up, we have Nahim Bassa, who is the group head of strategy and transformation at Bank Aljazira. He is a strategy and digital transformation expert. He's experienced in designing, building, and operationalizing new businesses and brands in the financial services sector. Of course, we have Hardman, one of my favorite people to work with. He's a partner with the Clifford Dubai office. He leads our financial services, regulatory, and fintech practices. He's advised local and international financial services, technology companies, and regional regulators. We also have Sahel, who is a partner with AS&H Clifford, our Saudi office. He specializes in corporate and equity capital markets. He leads the firm's Saudi investment funds practice. He's got an expertise in fintech, securities, and regulatory matters. As for me, I'm a senior associate in the corporate team with CC Dubai. I've worked with global financial institutions, crypto exchanges, and fintech platforms. But for today, I'll just be your moderator. So I'd like to start by telling you a little bit about the topics we'll be discussing today. Some of the highlights include key legal and regulatory developments in the UAE. We'll also get to hear what R3 is doing in the region. There's some very exciting news, I can promise you that. He will also, I think, Bryan will also be sharing with us what makes the Middle East such an attractive environment to set up in. We'll also get to hear perspectives on growth trends in the fintech space in the kingdom, as well as key challenges faced by such financial services. And at the end, we'll have the Q&A session. But of course, throughout the session, feel free to pop us questions in the chat box. And if time permitting, we'll get to your questions. So dear panelists, thank you very much again for taking out time to have the conversation today to discuss this very exciting topic. The Middle East has been a hotbed for fintech startups and financial institutions looking to grow their business in this space. Jack, can you share with us some of the key legal and regulatory developments that has contributed to the growth of fintech in the UAE?
Thanks, Kim. Hi, everybody. So yeah, the region remains highly focused on development of the fintech sector, both across the UAE, Saudi, and Bahrain, with bespoke licensing regimes, creative fintech, active sandbox accelerators, and strong incentives both from regulators and government and sovereign wealth for fintechs to set up. That strong government support has led to high capital flows into the fintech sector, including significant funding opportunities with the sovereign wealth providers in the region, which many international and regional players have benefited from. And the most significant amount of deals and fund investments have been in the sector, fintech sector, over the past few years, which is combined well with significant growth in the regional economy. So it's all really come together in this region, both from the funding and the economic growth perspective, to create a hot sector for fintech, which has been really spurred by very supportive regulators. And I think what we've seen in that sense is we have regulatory regimes which both support the incumbent industries to develop with those funding mechanisms, plus the region is becoming a great hub for international businesses to come and base out here in the region for their global operations as well as their regional ones. So it's been a very exciting region over the last few years. And in lockstep with that huge growth, we've had legal and regulatory regimes that have developed specifically for the fintech sector. We have developed financial services regimes for many different types of fintech operations, both onshore in the UAE for the incumbent market, but also international regimes designed for international players to come in and have a specific license for their global operations, which we'll talk a bit about in more detail in a second. But also the data laws here have also moved on. We've seen established data protection regimes in the UAE and Saudi Arabia give greater clarity to investors. So that clarity from the financial services and data laws have allowed international players to come in and access the market in a way that we previously hadn't seen until recent years. Given that growth in regulatory regime, the growth in players, the regulators have also expanded their operations. We're seeing regulators in the region a lot more sophisticated and experienced with fintech business models, available to speak to applicants, really seeking to help grow that with real mandates to grow in the fintech sector. So unlike many other jurisdictions, regulators here are actively seeking to support business models and support that growth in the region, which has been great to see, and has really helped a lot of our clients to be able to set up effectively in the region and deliver their services. I think another thing that the regulators and the accelerators have really helped with is bringing together the fintech sector with the incumbent financial services industry, and regulations have allowed those parties to come together and develop partnerships in the region, relying on each other's license where necessary to develop business models, and the regulators have generally been very supportive of that approach. And the sectors that have been particularly relevant across payments and remittance is a hugely topical area here with such a large expat population. Digital wallets are big here, along with crowdfunding, neo-digital banking, and as we'll talk about in a bit more, digital assets, which is a big focus of this region and a real hotbed for development in the sector. The big news as well, but most recently, is that the UAE is now off the FATF grey list, which it previously was on, and has now allowed us to lower capital for incumbents and also increase the amount of investment. That being said, there are still challenges that remain. There are still uncertainties as we are in a developed market. The regional regulations are still in their infancy in some areas. Policies and guidance is still to be prepared. For example, the data regulations I mentioned, we're just waiting for implementing regulations in the UAE, for example. There's still to come. So there are a few areas where there's still a bit of uncertainty in the regime compared to perhaps some other international comparators. Also, for the fintech sector, we don't have as many designed regimes for exit of fintech ventures. We don't have the IPO rules don't necessarily provide for as much growth capital IPO activity as we might see in other jurisdictions, and that sector is still quite emerging. So we have a lot of initial investment, but then perhaps fewer opportunities for exit that we've seen in the region. But that is changing over time. Another general issue we've seen through markets is obtaining bank accounts for local fintech operators as the central bank in many regimes getting accustomed with the fintech ecosystem, allowing accounts to be open. But with the FATF grey list removal and other AML regimes being improved, we certainly see that improving. Before I was going to mention three particular areas where we see real regulatory change that's been a huge development in the region. Payment services regulations, especially in the UAE, have really helped to spur developments. The central bank now licenses international providers who are 100% foreign owned to set up in free trade zones and get a license to be a payment service provider in the region, following a payment service regime similar to the Payment Service Directive, which is a very positive step for the region, given it allows both international and local businesses to develop payment services activities, complementing their international business models, and really access the local market, as well as incumbent industry to come and innovate. And that's led to a huge number of new payment services players coming into the region, and also incumbent innovation, which I think has changed the landscape quite significantly in recent years. And that regime continues to expand into areas such as buy now and pay later regulations, which have been a big source of activity amongst our client base. The second area is digital assets. Digital assets in this region, I think, compared to others, is extremely supportive. The regulators here have specific regimes that we talked about, and there are currently 4 different licensing regimes just within the UAE for crypto providers to choose from. Looking at the financial services international centers, the Abu Dhabi Global Market, the Dubai International Financial Center, both have specific crypto regimes building on their financial services frameworks. But most prominently and most recently, the Dubai Virtual Assets Regulatory Authority, the VAR, has been established as one of the world's first crypto-specific regulators that's been developed over several years amongst the incumbent industry to create a virtual asset specific regulatory body trying to develop international practices and bring together many global players, and has really been quite successful in doing that, as many of our global clients have looked to set up there and benefit from that specific regime set up in Dubai. Finally, we should mention the Central Bank Digital Currency Project that we're working on with R3, who are also on this call. And that's been another exciting development for the region. One of the first major wholesale and retail central bank digital currency projects to come to the market. And we've just been helping to amend the law to bring that project to fruition. We've seen the first international transfer of digital currency from the UAE to China most recently. And that system will provide for both a domestic wholesale, retail, and international transfer system for digital currencies through the Enbridge international system. And we're particularly excited by this as it does give rise to a new legal and regulatory regime to integrate a digital currency system with an underlying the DLT platform architecture to the payments landscape. And we see that as quite important as it shifts the whole market and the banking system to using a DLT platform for payments. And we see that as exciting for our region, as it will, we think, create a real platform for growth in the digital sector. Thanks, Kim.
Thanks, Jack. I think that's an excellent segue into the next area of our discussion. Bryan, we've been working together on, an extremely cutting-edge project for the central bank that Jack has just talked about. Can you tell us a little bit about what R3 is doing in the region, the rationale for setting up here, and your projections for the future?
Yeah, thank you, Clifford Chance, for having me. First of all, just want to start it off giving you a background about R3. So R3 was established in 2016 with a consortium of banks founded by David Rutter and Todd McDonald, and it looked to see how blockchain could transform the financial services as we know it from a regulated perspective. So heavily focused on regulated markets. When you think of capital markets, you think of markets that have been existing for hundreds of years. I think what you're seeing is how do we transform that with the latest technologies. So R3 was about helping understand how technology, with the use of distributed ledger technology, with the use of our platform called Corda, which we've built to help transform the financial markets. And then I guess just leading on to a bit about myself, personal development, where I've kind of developed into this in my journey. I've been visiting the GCC for a number of years, and I've seen the transformation specifically within the UAE and Saudi more specifically as well. But I think just the journey for us in setting up in the UAE has been quite, it was a chance that we couldn't miss out on. And I think anchored by our flagship clients, Central Bank of UAE, as part of their financial infrastructure transformation project, which Jack alluded to on the CBDC side of things, has been the flagship kind of project for us to really set the kind of scene with our technology. And I think this has enabled us to understand and, kind of focus on how we could establish a business within the region. Obviously, R3 is a global business servicing many clients across the globe. And I guess from our perspective, the reasons for choosing the UAE specifically was the ease of doing business. I think what you'll see is a lot of companies being able to streamline that. And that's thanks to the likes of what Jack mentioned as well, jurisdictions like ADGM and DIFC. And R3 is pleased to say that we selected ADGM based on a number of reasons due to proximity, but also incentivization programs from the government as well, from ADIO, Abu Dhabi Investment Office, and other benefits that we've been able to kind of been incentivized to do and join. And I guess from that perspective is also the ease of doing business. When I mentioned that, it's also to do with the regulatory framework. So one thing that we've seen is that the regulatory framework, which Jack mentioned, is there's new capabilities for fintechs to kind of establish their businesses within a safe and secure environment. And that entails the growth of new fintechs, but also incumbents coming from other across the globe. And that's attracted us to come to the UAE as another reason. And I guess you've probably seen that UAE is a kind of a financial innovation hub, and it's being in Abu Dhabi and being in UAE, UAE and Dubai, you see this every week. There's a new announcement, there's new partnerships being formed, and it's very vibrant. And you have new, I guess part of that is being involved in kind of incubating and acceleration programs such as Hub 71 in Abu Dhabi. So that opportunity to be part of that ecosystem has been really tremendous for us, because we've been able to mix and collaborate with other fintechs, which is great. And I think that's something that we're seeing as a part of the ecosystem, wider ecosystem, which is a great contributor from R3 perspective, being a fintech looking to establish ourselves in the region, but headquartering our main office out of Abu Dhabi. I think some of the other factors is the location, I think, is a really important factor. So the Middle East and specifically the UAE is well located from a perspective of connecting the East with the West. And I think this really has been a key driver. And I think Jack alluded to Project Enbridge, which is a BIS project for cross borders, which is using a multi-CBDC project. That kind of gives you a feel for what the Middle East is kind of working closely with the Eastern world, more connecting that through payments and lowering the cost and barriers through that. So I think that's a great opportunity for R3 to capture the rest of the world. And obviously R3 has done a lot of business in Southeast Asia as well, and then connecting those two together more seamlessly is going to be something that, you know, I'm excited about, and being in the region. So just a bit about our office setup. So we've set up an office in Abu Dhabi, like I mentioned. We've hired local talent. So we've hired Emiratis, which is part of our program and our commitment to the country. But localization is a key aspect of this. So when you think about localization, we see a lot of companies coming in. I used to be, you know, flying in quite often. And I think having that localization and actually setting up here and actually visiting your clients and seeing them face to face makes a huge difference. So I think the opportunity of engaging in the ecosystem, but being with your clients, spending more time is something that I've seen the value in doing. And we're delighted to be partnering with Clifford Chance in the consortium for the CBDC project that we're working on with the CBUE. So I think just to give you a kind of opportunity of like where we are, I think there's a huge opportunity for why we've set up here, but I think this is just a gateway of, you know, establishing our footprint in the GCC. Specifically the UAE to start off with. But just to allude, we're also working on other projects within the GCC, and we're also partnering with Clifford Chance in Qatar for the QCB wholesale project, which is an honor and delight to be partnering again, and we have a close collaboration. So I think helping drive that kind of acceleration of using our knowledge and expertise to help central banks, regulators, which Jack's alluded to, on their journey. And I think that's something that we can repeat, and it's definitely something that we can accelerate the journey for the central banks. And we're also, R3 are delighted to be working with SAMA, Saudi Central Bank, on their CBDC initiatives. And that's another opportunity for the region. And part of my mission, and just to give you kind of like, where do we see this going, and what am I seeing in this space? I think one of the things that we're seeing is central banks as the epicenters, and then also working with LFIs. So once you get the central banks in, you then start to capture the licensed financial institutions, and that's the banks who will be using the platform when you think about retail, wholesale, and cross-border platforms. So I think that's orchestrated by the central banks, but that filters onto the LFIs, and that's a great opportunity for R3 and others fintechs to start establishing new use cases. For example, collateral management. You think of tokenization of assets. These are things that are, you know, very vibrant, and like Jack alluded to, we're seeing the digital assets space with new regulations coming in and conforming to really bring it all together. So I think what we'll see is a CBDC and a digital assets seamlessly working together, so liquidity and the movement of assets can be more seamless, underpinned by a CBDC. Thanks, Kim.
That's excellent, Brian. It sounds like R3 has an exciting future ahead. I think, you know, we talked about the ease of doing business in the region, the various incentivization programs, as well as, you know, a really supportive ecosystem and framework that, you know, is developing in the region. Jack, could you also elaborate on the key drivers that you see for development as well, in addition to what Brian has already shared?
Thanks. Yeah, I think a big driver is the effective licensing regimes that we have here for incumbents to come in. We have many options to choose from depending on whether your business model is attracting for local market or the international market. So for local market, the central bank and other onshore regulatory regimes have developed bespoke licensing options where you can set up in different zones with different ownership models to suit your own business and access that local market quite effectively. But then also we have international focus regimes, the financial free zones of the ADGM and the IFC we mentioned, and where, you know, R3 is in the latter. And the benefit of those is they are separate from, in the UAE anyway, they're separated from the rest of the country from a legal and regulatory perspective, most laws anyway. So you have an almost common law regime with its own court system in the financial free zones, which allows firms who have an international approach to set up in there and access almost a UK-style rule book while still operating out of this region for their international business. And what we tend to see is incumbents seeking to use that global hub can really benefit from these financial free zones, which are designed specifically to attract that business, with regulators who have the mandate to grow business in those sectors and from this the international players. So you see a very receptive market, a very bespoke licensing regime designed for fintechs, designed for entrants to come in and get licensed quickly and effectively to do their business in an internationally benchmarked jurisdiction, which is growing in repute internationally, which many of our clients benefit from. But I think the collection of regimes and the different licensing option really caters for all in many respects, and we've seen that really give rise to a lot of our clients finding a number of options to think about when setting up here.
Thank you for that, Jack. I'd like to pivot now to what is happening in Saudi, and where are we seeing the kingdom's efforts to diversify its economy and to reduce its reliance on oil revenues. Sahel, Nahim, I wondered whether that's something that you could share on. It would be good to have your thoughts and perspectives on the growth trends you're seeing in this space.
Perfect. Let me just jump in there, right? Firstly, great to be here with Brian, Jack, Kimberly, Sarah, Vicky, and all the team, right, in Clifford Chance. And Ramadan Mubarak to all our listeners who are observing the holy month of Ramadan. Wishing you all the best through this auspicious period. As you've kindly introduced myself, I'm Nahim Bassa. I'm the Group Head of Strategy and Digital Transformation at Bank Aljazira. I've been here for the last 4 years, and I think if I talk about the journey of Saudi Arabia, I would like to talk through around my experiences and my lens that I've seen it since I've come here, which was right at the peak of COVID. I think I've caught one of the last flights still inbound to the kingdom. At that point in time, we were 3 years into the Vision 2030 journey. So, the Crown Prince had launched this transformation of this kingdom, reducing the reliance on oil, right? But really driving home some of the key fundamentals around technology change, societal change, right? Economic change. So it was quite an accelerated period of change for the country, right? And alongside this change came this rapid adoption of digital solutions, digital capabilities. I distinctly remember landing here. There was an app, right, that was COVID testing. Many people forget about all of these things, right? And locating you, showing your pass if you had been vaccinated. And what's interesting, around the same time, right, there were a launch of a couple of key fintechs into the Saudi ecosystem. I think there were only about 8 or 10 around the time that I joined. And what was really fundamental between that period of 2020 and 2022, right, was this phenomenal uptake, right, of these fintech startups, right, powered by the Vision 2030, but specifically within the Vision 2030 program, looking at things like what we call the Financial Sector Development Program, which is the FSDP, which has some key goals that is trying to be driven from a financial accessibility and adoption into the country. The country is really, really blessed to have, I think, a highly digitalized population. I think north of 90%, which is one of the highest in the world. Also, 50% of its population is under the age of 35. So very interesting, a young, hungry, dynamic population, right? Which in many ways is also a bit different to the UAE setup, right? And the demographic splits there. So it's quite interesting when you hear Brian speak, right? And the same challenges and the same opportunity sets, right? Irrespective of the demographic considerations. But I think what also has been very, very helpful, right, in this FSD program is that there's been like a set of maybe 200 KPIs, right? One of those KPIs you could argue is around, how does the country increase its savings rate, right? Double its savings rate from 6 to 12%. In another key KPI is literally getting to 500 fintechs by 2030. Right now, you're coming off a base of 10 to 500. The big question is, how do you do that, right? What is the enabling infrastructure? What is the foundations that you put down? How do you get the ecosystem to work together? And I think when looking through the lens of somebody who had arrived, right, there were a couple of big programs that were put into place. Firstly, I think big credit to SAMA, as you mentioned, as I think Jack mentioned as well, right? They were very forward-looking in their thoughts about how could they create the right legislative environment, the regulatory regime, right? And I think having a fintech startup that went almost unicorn status very early in the form of STC Pay, right, was great for the country, right? Because it set a great example of what could be done, and the ceiling was broken, right? There's so much more you could go on and do, right? So I think that having a champion was really, really good. I think the other big piece was the adaptive conditions around the laws, right? You've seen the EMI laws being implemented, right? And then being communicated to all the participants, right? EMI, for those of you who are unfamiliar around, is basically the payments regulation and law, right? Governing the new entrants into the market. What has been really great about that is that it's been constantly updated over the last 2 to 3 years. So I think that's been great. I think in some jurisdictions, you find that the regulation is put down and it's like a 5 or 10 year wait till it catches up with the technology. So I think that's been excellent. I think number two, I think the Ministry of Commerce, Ministry of Investments have been really proactive in trying to encourage fintechs to come to Saudi Arabia. And by that, I mean, whether you're on the East Coast of America, right, or whether you're in Africa, or whether you're in South Korea, right, there are a lot of incentives being put into place for you to bring those ideas, to bring those solutions and get them implemented. There's tax breaks, there's hiring models, right, but also a lot of enabling infrastructure around the coaching, development around that. And I think the third big driver, right, which has been really fantastic, and this is more like the grassroots driven bottom up, is the community, right? And when I talk about the community, I'm talking about the innovation hubs, the accelerators, right? And even some of the VC players who have set up these entities which help create a pipeline of startups, right? Both Saudi-based and non-Saudi-based. And what we've seen, right, is this huge how should I say, excitement, right? And I mean, in my role, right, I see every day I get propositioned. It's quite fun. It's exciting, funny, but I always use the word crazy because that's the rate of transformation here, right? You get things from buy now, pay later solutions, all the way to savings products, right? Investments, etc., right? So you're seeing this broad spectrum of solutions coming out. And in recent days and months, I would say, even I've seen some very interesting opportunities around cybersecurity, right? So if you think of it from a financial services perspective and the regulator, a lot around the control environment, right? Like how do you improve the control environment? How do you improve the risk environment? And the one thing that I'm really excited to see in the fintech space recently is this real big focus on SMEs. SMEs, I think globally are a big focus area for governments because primarily you've got high number of people being employed in the sector, right, within the economy. And when you diversify an economy, this is what promulgates success in the long term. On that point specifically, right, in the SMEs, right, it's also a very challenging space, right? You got moms and pop stores, you have green shoots of companies, but you also see the real adoption of those solutions that will help them grow, right? Whether it be inventory management, whether it be accounting packages wrapped up in a nice subscription software, right? It's really helped, I think, create this impetuous. And on this ecosystem, you're also seeing, I think, some of the best practices, if you could call it that, come to bear. You'll see the community getting together on like FinTech Tuesdays, right? Which is, I think, is a concept quite popular in Dubai and Abu Dhabi, right? You see these you start seeing familiar faces now, right, on these Tuesday get-togethers, right? And you see the new founders coming in, youngsters, more experienced hands, really to talk about the opportunities and challenges that are coming through. I think, when I look at some of the opportunities in the space, right, it's really about, how do these fintechs, right, find a good partner within Saudi Arabia, right? Because trying to do it yourself is quite challenging, right? Not because of, we've just spoken about all the good things about the supporting and environment and enabling legislation, but I think there are still challenges about how do you take these startups and actually scale them and get them commercial, right? Many have much success attracting new customers, getting the volume flow, getting the deal flow through the entity, right? But really thinking about, okay, how do we take it through the different stages, right? If it's VC funded, Series A, Series B, Series C for listeners out there. But really start thinking about, how do you make this entity self-sustaining, right? Not fully dependent on investment, right? Or support from a partner. What we've seen recently is that many banks have established their own, I would call them digital garages, venture hubs, right? Where they invite these fintechs to come in to get not just the development of the software and solution, but really the things that they can't get access to, like the governance, the regulatory, the compliance, the audit functions, right? Which I think are super helpful for first-time founders, established founders, right? To really help them adopt the right way and set up the business for the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years, right? I think that's been quite exciting within the fintech space in Saudi Arabia. And I always tell people, right, if you want to make an impact and you want to make a difference, come to Saudi Arabia, right? I think this enabling environment and infrastructure is super helpful, but also you get a chance to grow and build and do something different than compared to the other opportunities out there. So let me take a pause, right? I think I've said a lot for the last 10 minutes, and maybe take some questions or comments from
Thanks so much for that, Nahim. That was really, really helpful. And it was also really insightful. I think, your discussions about the various sort of programs and the support from the regulators really does indicate the kingdom's interest in building and growing the fintech space. You also mentioned how for sort of startups, one of the main issues is how do you scale up? How do you commercialize? And I think it'd be good to hear, Sahel, from you. What do you think are the sort of key challenges faced by financial service businesses in the region?
Thanks, Kimberly, and thanks, and thanks, Nahim. I'd echo everything that Nahim said. He and I have been working in particular on a particular payments project, which has enjoyed some of the benefits and been subject to some of the challenges that he mentioned. Just to go back one step and to say, as Nahim mentioned, it is, if you like, one of the KPIs of the country to encourage fintech. And we've seen that in the establishment of, Fintech Saudi, which is a joint regulatory of trade body, which encourages both startups as well as foreign investors to come to Saudi and to establish here. And we've seen that in the approach of the regulators, as Nahim mentioned, very dynamic, very open to new product lines, open in respect of introducing sandboxes, both on the banking side and payments, as well as on the securities regulatory side from the CMA, the Capital Market Authority. And so we've seen, over the last 5 years, new product ranges such as, open banking, crowdfunding, buy now, pay later, and a whole host of other sort of products, which are essentially launched initially in a sandbox with a handful of participants. The regulator and the entities themselves saw how that implementation phase had gone, and then the regulators then, at the end of that process, publish regulations to suit the industry. So I think there's a very sort of unusually dynamic and helpful and approachable perspective of regulators, and that's why we continue to see huge interest. Just a couple of weeks ago, I attended a fintech event sponsored by the British Embassy, where we had a whole host of UK-based fintechs coming to Saudi to see, what the country had to offer in terms of platform and in terms of investors. So, a hugely dynamic and exciting place to be in the fintech space. Just to touch on the challenges, I think one of the main ones is what Nahim mentioned, which is that, notwithstanding the fact that we have hugely helpful regulators and regulations, it is still, an unknown quantity as a country for many people. So, a good tip, as Nahim mentioned, will be to team up with, a local Saudi entity or founders. And by doing that, you'll have a really good insight into, how things work on the ground here, as well as building your network.
That's really interesting to hear. Sorry.
Yeah, sorry. I just want to add to what Sal was mentioning, right? Sal and I see a lot that's going on. I mean, last week, I think, or at least a week and a half ago, we had Leap country, right? And we were talking offline about how there was over like 250,000 participants. It's a big technology conference, right? Banks, financial institutions, both from in the country, around the region, right? It just shows you the traction that the fintech space is getting. But you also see other interesting trends emerging, right? And Sal mentioned it, right? This external, internal view, right? I mean, Saudi, I think just last week passed the 100 million tourism mark, right? Now, a lot of those are around tourists doing pilgrimages, etc., right? But they also have a lot of needs that need to be fulfilled, right? And I think we've all had that experience with going to another country, right? Whether it be on the forex side or even on the identity management side, right? To try and get that process done clearly. And I think, this interplay between SAMA, CMA, and FinTech Saudi, I think is quite exciting, right? Because it brings together the full package of the regulatory environment to help support this ecosystem that is needed for these fintechs to actually go to the next step, and really commercialize, create employment, have a positive impact on the country.
That's fascinating, Nahim, Sahel. Actually, I think it would be, we were quite lucky. We've gotten a question from the audience, and it also points towards the next item that we'd like to discuss, which is what are the panelists, what are your future expectations in this space for the Middle East? I'm happy to take from any one of the panelists.
Should I kick things off? So I think one of the things that I'm seeing, what I think we'll see is a issuance of a CBDC for sure. I think this is a commitment from the UAE, very strategic initiative, and I think UAE or Saudi will lead the way in this. So I think a central bank digital currency in the form of a retail, wholesale, and cross-border. I think that's the progression, and the road is happening there, and it will scale and adopt with the market fit. And the number of use cases will expand as well with the LFIs, licensed financial institutions, using it as well, and the benefits. And then that will reap the rewards for fintechs. But I think that will lay the foundations for digital assets. As we talk about digital assets, there's obviously the legal aspect of it. And when you think of digital assets, you think of tokenization of assets, of real world assets. And that could be, if you think about real estate, for example, the GCC, and you think about as a whole, within the whole GCC, real estate is a hot topic, very close to the hearts of many of the countries here within the GCC. And I think if you can get the legal framework to complement the kind of acceleration of assets, this will be a huge shift. And I think that's something that we'll see, tokenization of assets, real world assets, definitely coming in the next 3 to 5 years. And then I think of the development of the capital markets, specifically within the UAE. Saudi Tadawul is quite advanced in the market, but I think we'll see the debt market, for example, within the UAE, by laying the real digital financial market infrastructure. So when you think about countries growing their economies, I think that's something that we'll see within the capital market space, infrastructure being provided in a digital way, and CBDC is part of that. So you'll see CSDs, for example, central securities depositories being formed and acting as the backbone, similar to what Singapore did in many ways and Hong Kong.
think we may have lost.
Maybe I can jump in here.
Yeah.
So, I fully agree with what Brian was talking about, right? I think the central bank digital currency, I think the UAE central bank and even I think Sama have been working on a special project. It's quite known out there in the market. It's public information. So I definitely agree. I've taken a different lens to how he's taken it. I think, if I look in the next 3 years, I always think that's a timeline that we can semi-control, right? Or have an outlook on. I think there's 3 big things that will happen. And I think it's a confluence of, number one, artificial intelligence, powered by quantum computing specifically from a technology perspective. I think that'll be a big one. I think number 2, it'll definitely be around open banking, open finance, the open economy, and the sharing of data, right? And I think powered by some of these cross-border collaborations, right, will really be helpful for the region. And I think the third one, right, is ESG, right? A lot of opaqueness around ESG, but also a lot of commitment from all the players, right, in the region to drive the sustainability agenda, right? So it's about, I think it'll be a confluence of those 3 items that will really be really key in the next 3 years, right? So if any fintechs are keen to do something in that space, I think reach out to any one of us. We'd be keen to hear from you.
Thanks very much, Nahim. That's very insightful. I think, if from what I'm hearing, it sounds like we have a lot to look forward to in the region. I think we've also gotten some questions via email prior to this. A question from the audience prior was, how are traditional banks and financial institutions in the Middle East adapting to the rise of fintech and startups?
Yeah,
maybe you go
Jack,
for
would
it.
you like to... Okay, I'll jump in.
Perhaps we'll
I think from a...
Nahim.
Yeah, let me go first. So I think, I think banks, I think in the old days, and I like to call them the old days, right? There was always this view that banks are these traditional entities who are not keen on opening up or being seen to be participating and partnering up. I think that's all literally dead and gone, almost extinct. I think banks today are very firm and clear that all of them have a fintech strategy. All of them have a fintech agenda. Most of them have some sort of idea around partnerships, right? And many advanced ones think about how are they contributing to the ecosystem, either building a new ecosystem or at least participating in an existing one, right? So I think there's been a fundamental shift within the financial services industry around that. And in fact, I think a lot of banks are also trying to get onto the front foot now, right? About how do they actually encourage fintechs to come to them? How can X bank be the home of fintechs, right? Because they know this is a great way for them to compete in the future around it. We've also seen other banks build their own platforms, right, where fintechs can do cool things around, banking as a service, right? But also other building on solutions that the bank may not be offering today, or maybe needed to go after a specific segment or sub-segment in the economy, right? So I think the view from banks today is that, especially, right, in Saudi Arabia, in the UAE, and probably in the GCC in general, right, is that we are open for business, right? If you have a great idea, right, and you really want to get a partner to journey with you, we'll work with you either in one of 3 ways. We'll either take a stake in your company, which is, I think, the bare minimum, right, in terms of, okay, let's do some investment, let's give you seed, and let's grow you. The second thing is can this complement the existing services or replace some of the existing services? And on the third front is like doing something really greenfields and really new and exciting and innovative.
Nahim, your inbox is about to blow up, I think, with that statement, to hear that the banks are very encouraging of fintechs to sort of join them. And Jack, I understand that you had some points to raise as well on this.
Sure, no, I completely agree with what Nahim said. I think all the banks have adapted to work very well with the fintech market. I think from from a regulatory perspective, there's enhanced rules now that have enabled that interaction more clearly with pronounced outsourcing regulations that create that balance between the fintech and the bank to collaborate effectively. Exchange of data is often more clearly designed as to how that works and how the two can integrate. And we see open banking frameworks both in Saudi being considered UAE to really drive that integration and collaboration in the market. And I think, as Nahim said, what we see is a real drive for collaboration. I think there's a lot more emphasis the banks have to collaborate and engage with the market and try and create their own digital proposition as well, which can also compete with that market. So I think it's a very sort of buzzing ecosystem between all the players, and we've seen the frictions get less and less over time by sort of supportive regulatory structure.
Thanks for sharing that, Jack. I think we might have time for one more question. I think this came through in terms of technology. Which advancements, such as blockchain, AI, mobile payments, do you think are having the most significant impact on the Middle Eastern fintech landscape?
Shall I make a start on that? So just on I guess I can speak about the blockchain space, because I think we're seeing, what's really interesting, we're seeing countries at the national vision level now going into their financial sector development plans, now looking to leverage technologies, and regulators are very familiar with these technologies. It's surprising when you go in to visit SAMA or you visit the Central Bank of UAE, they have advisors who are pretty well catered to understanding the possibilities of these technologies. When you think of specifically blockchain and AI, I hear a lot about as well. It's not just a buzzword anymore. It's about how do we practically implement and use this technology, and that's a shift, because when you think about countries now looking to leverage the technology, they now understand the right fit and how the acceptance of using that, and then how do they mitigate the risks as well of using these technologies. They're not, blockchain is not going to be the answer for everything, but it will be the answer for specific use cases that, entail value, for example, asset ownership and moving that through the value chain of the asset class, for example, or the issuance of a currency where they can maintain control and governance within the governance framework. So I think this is something we're seeing, and, digitalization of, banking, if you look at the UAE, for example, it boasts one of the highest users of smartphones, right? And if you think about what the next leverage of using like wallets and payments to make that more seamlessly, and I think Jack touched on something really early on in the beginning, was about remittances. If you think about people sending money back out of UAE into other countries like India, for example, you think about the number of remittance flows moving from UAE to India, it's like 16.2 billion. I think the opportunity size, and if you think about the cost of that, operating that, is that, anything from the lowest rate you might see is 5% to maybe 12%, 10%, they can range from a huge spectrum. So I think there's an opportunity to lower that barrier, and fintechs will, accelerate and offer that through new technologies like blockchain, leveraging AI and big data. So I think there's a huge opportunity there.
No, that's really interesting to hear about the sort of transformation and digital transformation that the fintech space is going through. I think, unfortunately, we've run out of time today. So I'd like to thank the panelists for your time, and thank you for the audience for joining us today. It's been a really interesting discussion, very informative. Of course, if anyone from the audience, if you have any questions, and apologies we couldn't get through to all your questions today, our contact details are in our bio, so please feel free to reach out. And thank you very much, everyone, for your time today. Just a little note, at the end of the session, there will be a pop-up for our next event, which is Global Crypto Lessons Learned from Market Distress. So do sign on to that if you're interested. It starts right after this one. Thank you very much for your time, everyone.